A little Scarlet Letter humor. Hawthorne's attempt at a sequel. It's a letter B. I don't know what she did, but all right. This story is really a story about what labeling people, giving someone, kind of prejudging them before you know them. So why do you think human beings do that? So it's really about us and we push it onto somebody else. Okay. I'm not sure why we do it. I've seen so many like shows, television, theater, whatever, that try to attack that. One of the most memorable ones is if you ever watch the show, it's not in production anymore, How I Met Your Mother. And there's a scene where they all walk around with baggage and luggage and stuff, and it's how can you accept somebody when they come with baggage? And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea of kind of this concept of labeling each other. One teacher took it kind of a little ways, kind of did The Outsiders meets the Scarlet Letter, but she had everyone choose a sin, or if you want to call it a weakness that you have, take the first letter, and you had to wear it for an entire week. You know, so like if you find that you're an exaggerator, which is a fancy word for a liar, you'd have to wear an L for an entire week. And how that made you feel. You got to choose your letter, though, other than like Hester didn't get to choose her letter. And how people in their school walked around with these letters for an entire week, and people trying to figure out what the letters were and the judgment of it. And they actually, about 3 days in, had to stop the experiment because it started having people choose groups and pick at the other ones. And it was just, and it was a wonderful, well, it was a horrible experiment, but it was, on the other hand, it had side effects that she didn't expect to see. So the Scarlet Letter is definitely about that. And so what we're going to do today is, in the little time that we have today, to kind of go through the story and fill in the packet. So if you will take out your packet and also your summary, we're going to start with shortly after the break. In the summary here, this is the summary page. And we've looked at the novel itself. It opens, and then, bless you, there's this paragraph that starts, the women. The women are discussing the fate of Hester Prynne, a member of Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale's congregation, who has committed adultery and borne the child of an illicit union. She has been condemned to stand 3 hours on the platform of the pillory, wearing then and ever after the letter A as a bosom on her, on the bosom as a mark of her sin. Okay, so her punishment is actually threefold. It is to wear the letter or the label of adultery, stand for 3 hours every day on the pillory, and face the wrath of the people that are going to literally walk around her and say, that's what happens when you sin. Remember, this is Puritan New England, and so the one thing that these people did, and did well, was judge each other. Because let's go back to what we've learned about the Puritans. You know, they believed that if you were blessed, it was because everything was going right in your life and God was shining down upon you. However, if you're standing on a pillory for 3 hours, obviously you're condemned for hell forever. Okay? So that Puritan kind of idea comes about. All right, so she comes out. And it says, Hester appears with her baby and is marched to the pillory. As she stands enduring the solemn gaze of her people, her mind retraces her past life. And basically this chapter is a flashback. She had come from a good English family, but poverty had induced her to marry a man much older than she, a scholar, cold but penetrating in spirit and slightly deformed in a body. So Hester came from a family that basically, for lack of a better way to word it, they kind of sold her to marry this older man, and they saved their land and they saved their cottage. And so she married someone that was like 30 years older than she was, And at first they wanted their marriage to be a good one, but it was very soon that they realized that they weren't very compatible. If you will now go to your packet, there is a part underneath where we talked about the prison and the cemetery, and you'll see it labeled Hester Prynne, and some things that are underlined. If you remember from when you were freshmen, we talked about positive and negative characteristics, and we put plus for positive and negative for negative treatment, and a 0 for a neutral. Okay, so reading through this, this is Hawthorne's words. The young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale. She had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, beside being beautiful from the regularity of feature and the richness of complexion, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and deep black eyes. She was ladylike, too, characterized by a certain state and dignity, and never had Hester Prynne appeared more ladylike in antique interpretation of the term than as she issued from the prison. Those who had known her, and expected to behold her dimmed and obscured by a disastrous cloud, were astonished and even startled to perceive how her beauty shone out, and made a halo of misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. Okay? In your groups right now, if you will answer the 3 questions 15 through 17, and then 1 and 2 on the following page. All right, so we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Let's look at the paragraph that starts with at the edge of the crowd. At the edge of the crowd, Hester sees a man who answers the description of her husband. The man, who is a stranger, learns from one of the townspeople what is going on. He learns that Hester Prynne had been sent to America ahead of her husband, who has not been seen or heard of for 2 years, and is generally supposed dead. The stranger explains that he has been met with ill luck at sea and has been for some time past a captive of the Indians. And so what she does, or what Nathaniel Hawthorne does, is instead of using a flashback, we learn conversation. And it's very clear to the audience right away, the reader right away, that the man on the edge of the crowd is Hester Prynne's husband. And so he is Mr. Prynne, because that's her last name. And she came here ahead of him. Obviously, if they haven't seen each other for 2 years, knowing how babies are made, the baby she's holding is not his. Okay? He goes on to explain to the stranger in the crowd that he has been held captive by Indians for 2 years, just got away, and he headed to go pick up his wife. You know, and that's when the reader goes, ding, 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 that's her husband. And it's like, how ironic that he shows up on the day that she's punished and she comes out of prison. Well, in your packet there, you're going to see the name Roger Chillingworth. That is an alias, okay? Why would he use an alias? Yeah. There's my wife standing on a pillory who obviously had a baby that is not mine. So he uses an alias. Please read through that description of him very quickly and determine if he is a positive or negative character. Hester does not take her attention from this man until one of the group of magistrates who is witnessing the punishment from the balcony of the church, which is directly behind the pillory, addresses her. If you look at the picture that I try to have of, this is one of the silent films that was made, you can tell she's standing on the pillory and looking up. And so it's kind of like the pastors are now, if you want to call it in the bell tower, talking down at her and addressing her. And basically, da-da-da, she is the subject of today's sermon. Okay, that's always fun. Okay. He introduces her pastor, Arthur Dimmesdale. And in those days, pastors were held responsible for the sins of their congregation. So in the eyes of the church, Arthur Dimmesdale, as her pastor, should have stopped her from sinning. Okay? So he failed her. Okay? He introduces her pastor, Arthur Dimmesdale, who, though reluctantly, is persuaded to exhort her to alleviate her sin by revealing the name of the father of the child. Up to this point, she has not said who the father of her baby is. This is a small town. This would be like George. And the fact that they do not know who the father of the baby is probably driving them nuts. Because as in a small town, we know who is keeping company with whom. Okay? And they can't figure it out. He points out that by concealing the name, Hester may be forcing the father to hide a guilty heart and add hypocrisy to the sin. So he pleads with her, give up the name because it's going to make it easier on the father. And she says no. And he says over and over again, give up the name of the father. It will help him face his punishment. He should be standing there beside you. She says no. She's finally led back to prison in a state of nervous excitement, clearly in need of a doctor. And when you read the book, you kind of get the feeling that she's kind of like having a mental breakdown because she's just freaking out. Okay? It happens that the stranger himself is a doctor, Roger Chillingworth. Wow. When he's brought to Hester's room, the strong hints given to the reader that Roger Chillingworth is really Hester's husband are confirmed. He gives both mother and child a sedative, and I will tell you, when I read the book, I thought he killed the baby. Because he gives her the baby this thing, he drops it in its mouth, and she's like, wah! When she's just done. I'm like, oh my God, he killed the baby. He didn't, it's just a sedative. And in the conversation follows, states that he shares the blame with Hester for ever having entered a marriage with so ill-matched a partner. Hester will not reveal the name of the father to Chillingworth, but he swears he will find out. He extorts an oath from Hester that she will not tell the community he is her husband. Okay? Now, there's a reason. So he's going to infiltrate the community with the sole purpose of, I am going to find out who the father of the child is. And she says, I'm not telling you. I'm not going to let you torment this man. I'm not going to let you kill this man. I'm not going to let you do this. And he says, I will find out. But you must promise to keep my secret as well. So she promises never to tell anybody that he is her husband. So let's take a little bit stronger look at him and do that second paragraph about Roger Chillingworth. You may do those in your groups, please. So my question for you is this. Why do you think she won't give up the name of the father? Why do you think she protects it so much? Because of his punishment? What? I don't know about you, but I'm not that kind. I'd have given him up. I would have. I was like, you sat next to him. Yep. I think, and Hawthorne alludes to this, is that she wants him to have the courage to come forward. Why should she give up his name when he should be coming forward on his own? Not going to force you to do something that maybe you're not willing to do. Okay? So I have kind of not a very nice answer to number 4 here, but I have like, she wants him to grow a pair. I don't know. I mean, I know that idiom is not maybe the most appropriate, but I think that's what Hawthorne kind of hints at, that she wants him to have the courage to stand up beside her because she's facing her punishment. Okay? So we're now at the top of the second column here. Okay? And I have kind of an illustration here for you of where she ends up living about the next 2 chapters. We need to understand that Hester had the option of just leaving on her own. She did not have to stay in Boston, which is a small community right now. She did not have to stay in Boston to face her punishment. She could have picked up her child and moved to a different colony and made up a very elaborate lie about her husband being killed in Indian attacks or whatever, and she could have had a very good standing in another community. But the choice that she made is, this was the choices that I made, these are the consequences to the choices that I made, therefore I'm going to see and face them out, which of course is the underlying theme of the Scarlet Letter. Remember Hawthorne and the whole idea of guilt and facing your guilt as a family. So Hawthorne devotes the next 2 chapters to the characters of Hester and her daughter Pearl as they begin to live out their lives under the censure of the community. Okay? So why do you think the name Pearl, which is the answer to number 5? It is a symbol. The purity of the pearl. That she didn't really come from a purified. Okay, something good coming up. How is a pearl formed?
Grain of sand.
Thank you. And as the grain of sand gets into the oyster, basically the oyster is going and it's saliva that hardens. I'm sorry, that was probably, I'm sorry that's going to come across on that video really horrible. But anyway, so it's like a grain of sand and it's saliva that goes across. So it's born out of irritation and pain. Think about the birth of this child. This child is born out of pain, just like a pearl is. So there's definitely a lot of symbolism into this story. Okay. All right. So Hester decides to stay in Boston, enduring the continuing attention of the townspeople with courage and modesty. She settles down in that isolated cottage and makes use of her skill of fine embroidery to earn a living, gradually establishing the high reputation for her work. So I'm just going to stop for a minute and let you fill in questions 5, 6, and 7 here real quick. Pearl grows up isolated from the bigoted Puritan children. Nobody would play with her for obvious reasons. She is light and gay, but willful, with something so preternatural in her makeup that it is rumored that she is a demoned offspring. And the thing about Pearl is because this little town is obsessed with who is her father. And in a small town, like I said, we know everybody else's business. And because they can't figure it out, they begin to think about, did Hester go into the forest and sign her soul away to Old Scratch? Is Pearl the daughter of Satan? And Pearl is an unnaturally, not unnaturally, she's an extremely beautiful child with violet eyes, which are unusual, beautiful skin, and unlike other Puritan children, Hester dressed her in reds and oranges and blues, almost like she was a target. But she dressed her beautifully in these beautiful colors. And Pearl, as it continues on, her strange fascination with the A on her mother's breast causes Hester considerable anguish and seems to indicate that Pearl is a supernatural instrument for executing Hester's penance. We have to remember, by number 5, write the word living A. How did the community figure out that Hester had had an affair? She got pregnant. If she'd have never gotten pregnant, the town would have never known. So Pearl is the living reminder of Hester's sin. And so every time Pearl shows up in the community, it's like, oh, adulteress. And remember that throughout this time period, because the book is going to shoot 7 years in advance, so for 7 years, they have stood on the pillory for 3 hours every day. And that's what this child, yep, they have to do it until they die. Yeah.
And the baby.
And the baby. So the little girl has learned to stand up, a toddler, 2 years old, 3 years old, 7 years old, stand on the pillory. Yes, for 3 hours anyway. All right, so